Hello, I'm Lee Bernick, Dean of the College of Urban Affairs, and I'd like to welcome you to our first episode of the Urban Report. Our purpose on this program is to cover topics of interest to our campus and our local community. Our first guest this evening is Nevada Assemblyman William Horne. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Dr. Bernick.
Well, William, I've asked you to come here for a couple of reasons. One, you're in the legislature, and we're going to be hearing a lot of news in the next couple weeks, month about things in the legislature and about issues and problems for Nevada. But I also want to point out that you have special ties to the college. You graduated from UNLV in...
From the Criminal Justice Department at Congresswoman College, Urban Affairs.
Yeah, so you're one of our students, and you've made good, and you then went to...
the William S. Boyd School of Law.
So you are doubly linked to the university, and we're excited and proud about that. And we want to move along here. You are the assemblyman from District 34, which covers the northwest part of the city.
Correct.
First elected in 2002. And you've served 4 regular sessions. You're in your 4th regular session.
That's correct.
And you've served in a variety of special sessions.
Yeah, approximately 8 or 9 special sessions.
8 or 9 special sessions. So they're not so special maybe in some ways.
In some ways,
yeah.
not so much.
You also are the committee chair for the Committee on Corrections and Paroles and Probations, and we might have a chance to get back onto how that role may impact or have some impact in the near future. You are a assistant majority whip also in the assembly. What does a whip do?
Well, the whips are basically responsible for making sure we have the votes for important pieces of legislation that may be in our house. And so if it's an assembly bill or a Senate bill toward the later half of the session, we need to get it out and get it processed and over to the governor for a signature. A certain number of votes are required to make that happen, and sometimes we're sent out to try to get those votes that are necessary. So there's the whip, and there are 2 assistants. The whip is Sheila Leslie, and the other assistant is Debbie Smith, and us 3 work closely together in understanding all the measures that come before the legislature.
Okay. And sort of serve as a connection between you and the leadership in terms of the speaker and making sure that the speaker understands what the rest of the assembly is thinking about, and then the other assemblymen know what the leadership is thinking about.
Absolutely. If the speaker, the majority leader, asks about a specific bill, where is this bill, what's it, in the process, we'll be able to tell them it's currently in this committee, or it's at a hearing and it's coming up for work session, or we currently don't have the votes for it in its current stage, and, because there's a lot of amendments that happen to a bill through the process.
Good. So an important job. We've heard a lot about the governor, and the governor may be calling a special session. Why are we moving into a special session?
Well, the projections on our revenue for the state have come in way short, estimated approximately $800 million. That's too high of a hole for us to mitigate with the IFC, the Interim Finance Committee. So a special session have to be called in order for us to fill that hole before the next session.
So we have special sessions, and can you tell the community how those special sessions work? Who calls them? How long they could be in process? How do they all work? How does the session work?
By Constitution, only the governor has the power to call a special session. And the governor kind of sets the agenda, the purpose of the special session. He'll issue a proclamation. He'll probably do that the 8th of February, from what I'm hearing, on when we're going to go in for special session and what our purpose for the special session is. Once we're in the special session, in this regard, it'll be how we're going to close that hole. The legislature has the power to come up with the plan, so to speak, on how we're going to do that. Typically, what has happened in the past, though, the legislature and the governor's office work together to find that solution. So the time in special session is relatively short because it costs money to run a special session. But the maximum number of days we can be in a special session is 20 days.
20 days. They could call you back, could call a second special session if they needed to go, but that's...
That actually happened in 2003 to my freshman session.
Okay, that was a tax session.
That was.
Yeah.
And instead of finishing the first week of June, We didn't finish till the third week of July.
Okay. Now, you talked about the governor issuing a proclamation and saying what the session is about. You and I, before we started, you used an analogy about this. So if the governor calls a session, how much are we tied to, what does the legislature have to do, and how controlled are they by this call or this proclamation?
Well, the governor's going to say that we got to close this hole of $800 million. But the governor can't tell us exactly how to do that. He can make recommendations, and as I alluded to before, we would like to work with the governor's office on how we're going to make that happen. But he's limited. He can't tell us how to do that. So this next legislative session, we're obviously going to be looking at a lot of cuts across the board. Unfortunately, it's going to be painful. But the governor can't tell us, no, you're only going to do 3% here, but you're going to do 14% here, and that's the purview of the legislature. It's kind of like if he says you need to cook some eggs, he can't tell us we have to scramble them or hard boil them or poach them or anything like that.
Okay, so he can say you have to talk about the hole, but he doesn't tell you how you have to fill the hole.
That's correct.
Okay. In the short time that we have remaining, let me ask you one final question. You're in chair of a committee on probation and parole and corrections. Is this going to impact, this budget hole going to impact the prison system?
It probably will, in that if there's cuts there, it could affect staffing. It could increase the burden, say, on parole and probation. Should inmates be, say for instance, inmates are released, but they're on parole, that's a burden on parole and probation.
So we have a lot to look forward to, or maybe worry about, depending on where you're coming from on this whole thing. But the session ought to be an exciting and interesting time for you and the other members, other 62 members of the legislature. I want to thank Assemblyman Horne and appreciate you coming in. And we want to introduce a piece done by Ashley Kringen on young people and their work in Washington, D.C. Thank you, Assemblyman Horne.
Washington, D.C. is a place known for power and politics. Thousands of striving young adults come to D.C. from all over the country, hungry to make their mark in this powerful city. D.C. attracts people for multiple reasons.
It's really exciting, to be honest, especially now so much is happening in Congress, so many important reforms are being put through. It's just very energizing almost to be here, like right in the center of everything. And I mean, I grew up here, so I've had some idea of how it works, but actually being here and working here is like totally an experience. My ultimate goal with this internship is to basically learn more about the dynamics that are at play here, to get some exposure to the legislative process, to sort of compare the realities of the legislative process to the things that I've learned about in my government courses back in school. So, I'm just treating this as like a learning experience, basically, like the best possible learning experience.
Social interaction is another force that drives people to D.C.
I think it's a great place to get a start, really, to be honest with you. You get to meet so many people with like interests like you, because other places you don't really see too many people who are interested in government, whereas the people I've met here all have, abnormal interests in government almost. It's a place like, even in political science classes, you get a lot of people who are apathetic about it. And here, everyone's really into it, and it's like you get interests, and you meet a lot of people like that.
For others, it's being a part of political history that has the most effect.
I really enjoy coming up here and walking by the Capitol building and realizing that I work here and I cover this people who work inside this building, and it's kind of cool.
Our nation's capital has a lot to offer young adults, from sightseeing to experience. From Washington, D.C., I'm Ashley Kringen.
Our next guest for the show is actually a neurologist, Dr. Charles Bernick. But what's really interesting about this is kind of fun for me because Dr. Bernick is also my cousin. And
younger cousin, I should say.
Yes, a much younger cousin. And this thing, Dr. Bernick earned his BA in Rice and then went on to medical school at the University of Texas Southwestern, and has spent a long time doing work on Alzheimer's, and that's why we have him here today. We are going to talk about Alzheimer's. How'd you get started in Alzheimer's? research or work?
Well, I kind of fell into it, Lee. This was back in probably the mid-1980s where the disease really wasn't that much understood. But I got involved in a nursing home doing some moonlighting and was kind of fascinated by really this process that seemed to not be well understood at that time. And then over these years, over the last 20 years or so, our knowledge of the disease has just exploded. And this is what's made it a very exciting field.
You know, when we talk about the explosion of the knowledge of it, we also are, I think there's a chart that we're going to bring up that we can talk about and show the incidence or prevalence and what the potential problems are for the larger public in the sense of what's going to happen with Alzheimer's in the next 40 years or so. I don't know if we have that. Do we have that chart on here? What we will see, I think, in this chart is that between 2020 and 2030, the line starts going up fairly dramatically. That line goes up because of people like me and maybe you. Are you a baby boomer?
I am a baby boomer.
So it's partly us.
Exactly, Lee. It has all simply to do with demographics. We know that Alzheimer's disease is an age-related disease. That is, the older you get, the more likely you are to demonstrate the disease. So as people are living longer, now if you make it past 60, the life expectancy is about 85 or so, we're going to see more and more cases. And this, from a wide view, this is going to be a huge public health problem. It costs billions of dollars just to care for people now with Alzheimer's disease, and then you multiply that. Plus, those numbers only show part of the picture. You have to remember, for every person with the disease, there's usually a caregiver or two that are impacted just as well. Could be a child, could be a spouse. And so this is going to be a huge problem we're going to have to deal with as a country.
And on that chart, one quick question, because I want to talk to you about something else. We saw that people over 85 are more likely to get that. And that's just not because we're diagnosing them, but rather they actually are getting.
Yes, the disease, it's not just an artifact of our better techniques of diagnosing. It is true that as you get older, like many diseases, the incidence of getting Alzheimer's disease truly increases. So we're just going to see more people with the disease.
Okay. We only have a few minutes left. I'm sorry, we'll have to have you back and talk about this some more, but one of the issues I think everybody always wants to know is what are some of the signs of Alzheimer's, and can you give us a few of the signs that we might look at and see in terms of Alzheimer's and we should be looking at if you family member?
Sure, that's a common question, and I think just understanding the disease, that memory and what we call executive function, which is your higher levels of processing, are usually the first symptoms of the disease. So increasing forgetfulness, difficulty doing tasks that are more complex that you just cannot do anymore. But also emphasize behavior changes, loss of initiative, loss of motivation, loss of interest in activities can be an early sign of Alzheimer's disease if you're in your 70s or 80s, and people need to pay attention to that.
So mood changes would be one of those things?
Could be mood changes, and a lot of these things are just kind of pushed under the rug because people say, well, you're just getting older, and that's part of aging, but it really may not be. And I also want to say that if somebody's demonstrating it, it may not be Alzheimer's disease. It could be due to vitamin deficiencies or drugs or things that are truly reversible. So if somebody demonstrates these things, they really need to get an evaluation.
Okay. And if people are concerned about this, they could talk to or call you're at the Lou Ruvo Center, and they could call the Lou Ruvo Center and make an appointment. I think we're going to be putting up the number for the Lou Ruvo Center on the screen, and we'll see. But they can call the Lou Ruvo Center, and the number is 702-483-6000. And you're there. You're the associate medical director at the center, and they can make an appointment to see you or one of the other physicians.
Absolutely, we'd be happy to see them. And I'd also like to mention the tie with UNLV. We see ourselves not only providing clinical care, that's our main mission, but really we're a teaching facility too. We've had students in psychology, social work, and we really do see the tie with UNLV and other educational institutions here as part of our mission.
Great. Thank you. And we'll have you back again, CB.
Very good.
Okay.
Be happy
Thank
to.
you.
Thank you.
One of the assignments for students who went to Washington, D.C. was to meet and interview our members of congressional delegations. Ashley Kringen met with Congresswoman Dina Titus and files this report.
I'm Dina Titus. I'm the Congresswoman from Nevada's 3rd District.
Titus says her schedule is demanding, but there's never a dull moment.
I'm working very hard. It's about 24/7, I'll tell you. We work long hours, but it's such an exciting time to be here. It's a historic time, I believe, with this president and a very aggressive agenda. I wouldn't want to be anywhere else.
Setting herself apart from the rest, Titus is a member of 3 committees.
Well, usually you only serve on 2 committees, but I got a waiver to serve on a 3rd because I thought if I'm back here, I might as well be working hard for Nevada. So I'm on Education and Labor, which makes sense because I am an educator. I'm on Infrastructure and Transportation, and that's very important, the transportation part especially, because we need to find ways to get people to Las Vegas to have holidays and to work and for business meetings, so that's important. And the 3rd one is Homeland Security.
Stepping down from Nevada Senate Minority Leader was a challenge.
It took a little psychological adjustment because I used to be in a position of real power and now suddenly I'm a freshman again. But I've learned that you set your sights on different things and you can make progress in different ways from in the legislature. While there I was writing bills, here I'm shaping bills through things like amendments and the committee process. So if you work hard, the leadership will give you an opportunity to kind of shine, and so that's what I'm trying to do.
One thing's for sure, Titus enjoys the perks of work life in D.C.
I love this office, for one. We were lucky in the draw. I drew number 3, so I got a good choice of a nice office for a freshman, and I feel like I'm really in Congress here with these high ceilings and marble floors. And whenever I look at that Capitol from any angle, any time of day, any kind of weather, I feel a little tug at my heart because, you know, it's just such an honor to serve there. And I think, wow, that's where I work. So I love that. And my apartment is right here on the hill. It's 5 blocks away, so I walk to work. And it's a nice urban setting in an old townhouse. So that's a lot of fun, too.
Congresswoman Dina Titus says she's working hard to make a difference in Washington, D.C., as well as to represent her constituents and the state of Nevada. From our nation's capital, I'm Ashley Kringen.
Well, right now we have another guest and a faculty member from our who's an associate professor in the Department of Physics and Astronomy. Prior to, and that's George Rhee, and prior to coming to UNLV, George was at New Mexico State University, if I'm not mistaken.
That's correct.
Right?
Yes.
And you specialize in, let me see if I can get this right, extragalactical astronomy.
Yes, that's correct.
Right?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. 2 weeks ago, and one of the reasons we have George here is because 2 weeks ago he had an article, he was a co-author of an article in Nature magazine, and it's one of the more prestigious magazines, and actually the story that's in here that he's a part of a co-author was covered by MSNBC and CNBC, I think it is, and some other places. So
about
it's
70 other
yeah,
places all
so
over
that's
the
a
world.
kind of exciting thing, and we're doing exciting research here at the university, and it's always nice to have a faculty member in doing some work. So let me start out as one of those people who I go outside my house, I go out on my patio, I look up in the sky, and I see stars or whatever. What do I see when I go out there and look up in the sky?
Yeah, certainly when you go outside, well, inside Las Vegas here, you don't see very much. I mean, because the night sky is so bright due to human sources of light, what we call light pollution, that you only see a handful of the very brightest stars. But if you were to go out to, say, Boulder City or the Lake Mead area or even, say, Death Valley, then you'd see a few thousand stars on a moonless night. And what's interesting, one of the fascinating discoveries, I think, of the 20th century is that when you look at those stars, as a sort of non-specialist, you might think, well, that's all there is to see. We're seeing what's there. But actually, the stars account for only 1% of the mass that's out there in the universe. It's as if the viewer watching this TV show sees the two of us, but there are really 198 other people in this room that we can't see that are affecting us.
So let me. So there's all this. We see the stars, but there's this other stuff.
Correct.
But are the stars Is there one galaxy? Do we see two galaxies? Do we see a whole bunch of galaxies? The stars are part of galaxies, right?
Absolutely. So the analogy I like to give for, say, Nevada, is that the stars are not randomly distributed in space. In fact, they're distributed a little bit like in space, like the people in Nevada. If you, I don't know, there's maybe a couple of million people in Nevada or so, but they're not randomly scattered throughout the state. They're clumped in these huge aggregations called cities. And if you like, in nature, we find that stars are clumped in these aggregations of stars called galaxies. And between the galaxies is mostly empty space. There's not very many stars at all. And the central problem of astronomy is a big science and they study all sorts of things, but to my mind, is to understand how these galaxies came into existence. They haven't always been there. There was a time when there were no stars or galaxies, and we'd like to understand why. How we get from there, when there was nothing, to here, to the complex universe that we see today.
Okay, but there are different types of galaxies, right?
Yes, so there are many different kinds of galaxies. Broadly speaking, there are spiral galaxies, which rotate, and there are elliptical galaxies, which are shaped more like footballs and don't rotate.
Okay, and your research that's in Nature magazine is about partly about dwarf galaxies, because that's sort of what you study.
Yes, we've chosen to study, because we're interested in the dark matter problem, we've chosen to focus on dwarf galaxies because they're dominated by dark matter. And so that's the interest. In a sense, they're just very small versions of the Milky Way, but with one key difference. The Milky Way has a central bulge with many, many stars in the center, and these dwarfs do not.
Okay.
We'd like to know why.
And you want to know why, and it's my understanding that part of the work that you did in this research, we actually have a film that shows part of that. And if we can watch the film, and maybe you can talk about what we're seeing on this film.
Yes.
So if we can roll the film and see where we are on this.
So what we have here is a computer simulation, this isn't a real observation, of the formation of a galaxy. And the number that you see on the bottom right of the screen is the time since the Big Bang, where today would correspond to about 14. So about 1/10 of the way, 10% of the age of the universe there right now. And what you see is the gas is sort of clumping to form a galaxy, and just then we saw a big explosion. And those explosions, which have been included for the first time in detail in a computer simulation, hence the interest in publishing this in Nature. Those explosions can throw some of the gas out of these dwarf galaxies, which are not very massive, so they don't have enough mass to retain all their gas. And this affects the details of how the galaxy will look once it's formed. And part of the key is to understand why there's not a concentration of dark matter and stars in the center of these galaxies. And taking into account this effect of stellar explosions seems to account for why these galaxies don't have this concentration of mass and stars in their centers. And this was a real problem for the theory of galaxy formation. So the theory of galaxy formation has been rather successful, but there are a couple of areas where it didn't seem to work. And so it seemed that with this simulation, we've solved one of these problems.
So we have a better understanding now, we think, of how the galaxies are formulated and work?
We think we've potentially solved one of the key problems of galaxy formation.
Okay.
So, we'll have to look at future research to see if this is final, but we've taken steps in that direction and pointed the way, I would say. Yes.
All right. And we have other faculty members at the university who are doing, in astronomy, right, that are doing similar kinds of work?
Yes, we've been fortunate in recent years in assembling, I would say, a very talented group of individuals. We've brought in some young people. I mentioned Bing Zhang and Ken Nagamini and Daniel Proga, and there's my colleague Steve Lepp, who was at UNLV before I arrived. But all of these people, I think it might be of interest to your viewers, or at least we're certainly proud here of the fact that they're making contributions on the world scene of science. And I think that's also an advantage for students. I think it's a nice thing to hear about science from one of the practitioners, rather than someone who's read the book, 6 months before you and is repeating it. I think it's exciting and a benefit here at UNLV to hear about scientific discoveries from someone who's participated in them. And that's something we're excited about.
Well,
say, in our group.
I would hope so, and we're excited to have you here, and I hope at some time in the future, and we'll make this a kind of regular part of our urban report, to have a focus on science, and have you come over some more, and other members of your department and other members of the College of Science.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent idea, and I thank you for that opportunity.
Okay. Well, thank you, George, for coming in today, and I hope you visit us again. And thank you for all of you tonight for watching this show. If you have questions or topics you'd like to address, please contact me, leebernick.unlv.edu. I hope you enjoyed this show, and see you next time on the Urban Report.